The rain fell soft against the marble headstone as Jeremy knelt in the wet grass, his daughter's hand tight in his. But when he looked up, a stranger stood on the other side of his wife's grave, a German woman in a black coat, holding a child who had Adele's eyes. Jeremy's breath caught. The woman's lips trembled as she whispered words that would reveal the secrets behind his wife's death. Who was this woman? And why did the child in her arms look exactly like his dead wife? Before we continue, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Jeremy Walker had become a man of patterns. Wake at 6 a.m., make breakfast for Karina, walk her to school, work his shift at the hardware store, pick Karina up, help with homework, read her a bedtime story. Then sit in the dark living room staring at Adele's photograph until exhaustion pulled him under. 3 years of this. 3 years since the accident that took his wife. The medical examiner had called it blunt force trauma from a vehicular collision. Hit and run. The driver was never found. Adele had been walking home from the grocery store when a black SUV mounted the sidewalk, struck her, and vanished into the evening traffic. She died instantly, they said. Mercifully quick, they said. As if mercy had anything to do with a 32-year-old woman being torn from her husband and 5-year-old daughter. Jeremy remembered that night in fragments. The knock on the door. The police officers with careful faces. Karina asking why Mommy wasn't home for her birthday cake. The hospital corridor that smelled of disinfectant and the end of everything good. Adele Walker had been a quiet woman, gentle and steady as morning light. She worked as a bookkeeper for small businesses, kept their modest apartment spotless, loved Karina with a fierce tenderness that made Jeremy's chest ache. They'd met at a community college 8 years ago, both taking night classes. She was studying accounting. He was learning carpentry. They'd bonded over terrible vending machine coffee and dreams of simple happiness. She never talked about her family. When Jeremy asked, she'd grow distant, her eyes clouding over like winter glass. "They're gone," she'd say. "It's just us now." He'd learned not to press. Everyone had pain they carried in silence. Now, standing at her grave on the 3rd anniversary of her death, Jeremy felt the familiar hollow ache settle into his bones. Karina clutched a bouquet of yellow daisies, her mother's favorite, her small face solemn beyond her 8 years. The cemetery was nearly empty. Gray clouds hung low, threatening rain. Jeremy placed his hand on the cold marble, traced Adele's name with his fingertip. Adele Elizabeth Walker, beloved wife and mother. 1988-2021. "I miss you," Karina whispered, laying the flowers against the stone. "Every single day." Jeremy was about to speak when he heard footsteps behind them. Slow, hesitant, the sound of someone approaching with great deliberation. He turned. A woman stood 10 feet away, mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back severely, dressed in an expensive black coat that didn't quite hide her trembling hands. Her face was pale, carved with exhaustion, and something deeper. Something like guilt. But it was the child she held that made Jeremy's heart stop. A little girl, perhaps 3 years old, with dark curls and hazel eyes exactly like Adele's. The same small nose, the same delicate chin. The resemblance was impossible, undeniable, terrifying. The woman's lips parted. Her voice carried a German accent, crisp but breaking. "Mr. Walker, I am so very sorry. But you must know the truth." But what Jeremy was about to learn would unravel not just his understanding of his wife's death, but everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd loved. Karina's hand tightened in Jeremy's. The blonde woman took a step closer, and Jeremy noticed the way she moved, careful, protective, like someone accustomed to danger. "Who are you?" Jeremy's voice came out harder than intended, a father's instinct rising. "And who is that child?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the gravestone, then back at Jeremy. My name is Greta Hoffman. I was Adele's closest friend, the only one who knew the truth. Jeremy shook his head slowly. Adele never mentioned anyone named Greta. She didn't have friends from before we met. She always said that her family was gone. Greta finished. Yes, that is what she told you, but it was not entirely true. The little girl in Greta's arms squirmed, reaching toward the gravestone. She made a soft sound, almost like she recognized something. Greta adjusted her grip, and for the first time, Jeremy noticed the child wore a small silver bracelet, delicate, expensive-looking. I don't understand, Jeremy said, though dread was already pooling in his stomach. Greta glanced around the cemetery. Her movements quick, nervous. Not here. Please. There is a cafe 3 blocks away. If you want to know who your wife really was, if you want to know why she died, meet me there in 1 hour. She turned to leave, then stopped. Without looking back, she said, and bring Karina. She deserves to know her sister. The word landed like a stone in deep water. Sister. Jeremy stood frozen as Greta walked away, the impossible child resting her head against the woman's shoulder. Karina tugged at his sleeve. Daddy? What did she mean? He couldn't answer. His mind was reeling, trying to fit pieces together that didn't match. Adele had been pregnant when she died. That's what the medical examiner had noted. 6 weeks along, they'd said, though Adele hadn't known yet, hadn't told him. He'd grieved that loss too, the child who never got to be born. But the girl in Greta's arms was 3 years old, which meant she'd been born before Adele died, which meant Adele had been pregnant, had given birth, and never told him. But why would his wife hide an entire child from him? And what else had she been hiding in the shadows of their seemingly simple life? The cafe was small, tucked between a florist and a used bookstore. Jeremy sat across from Greta in a corner booth, Karina beside him coloring on a placemat. The little girl, whose name Greta said was Hilda, sat in a high chair eating pieces of banana with concentrated determination. Greta had ordered tea but hadn't touched it, her hands wrapped around the cup like she needed the warmth. Adele's real name, Greta began, voice low, was Adele Elizabeth Becker. Not Walker, Becker. The name meant nothing to Jeremy at first. Then recognition sparked. Becker, as in Becker Industries, the corporate empire that manufactured medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, defense technology, a family worth billions. No, Jeremy said immediately. That's impossible. Adele worked as a bookkeeper. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. Greta's smile was sad. Yes, because she chose to disappear. She chose to leave behind everything, her name, her inheritance, her family, to protect you and Karina. Jeremy felt dizzy. Nothing made sense. Adele had clipped coupons. She'd bought Karina's clothes at thrift stores. They'd saved for months just to afford a weekend trip to the beach. Why? He managed. Why would she do that? Greta leaned forward. Because her family was dangerous. Her father, Wilhelm Becker, he built his empire through ruthless means. And when he died 4 years ago, he left everything to his 3 children. Adele, her older brother Klaus, and her younger sister Heidi. She paused, watching Jeremy process this. But Klaus, Greta continued, her voice hardening. He could not accept sharing power. He wanted it all. Heidi died in a skiing accident 8 months after their father. The investigators ruled it accidental. Adele knew better. Karina looked up from her coloring, sensing the tension. Hilda dropped a piece of banana and giggled. The sound was so much like Karina's baby laugh that Jeremy's throat tightened. Adele came to me, Greta said, 3.5 years ago. She was 6 months pregnant. She said Klaus had discovered where she was living. She said he would not stop until she was dead, until every obstacle to his total control was eliminated. Jeremy's hands had begun to shake. If she knew she was in danger, Why didn't she come to me? Why didn't she tell me? Because she loved you, Greta said simply. Because if Klaus knew you existed, knew you mattered to her, he would have used you as leverage. He would have hurt Karina to control Adele. She kept you separate, kept you safe by keeping you ignorant. The words stung because they rang true. Jeremy thought back to Adele's habits, her insistence on keeping their lives small and quiet. The way she never used social media, how she'd asked him not to post photos of Karina online. He'd thought she was just private, cautious. So she gave birth to Hilda alone? Jeremy asked, looking at the child who had his wife's face. Greta nodded. I helped her. In my apartment in Munich. It was difficult, dangerous. But Hilda came into this world healthy and perfect. And then what? Adele just gave her away? The bitterness in his voice made Greta flinch. She made an impossible choice. Klaus had people watching. She knew if she brought Hilda back to you, if he discovered another heir existed, he would kill all of you. So she asked me to take Hilda to Germany, to raise her in secret, to keep her safe. Jeremy stared at the little girl in the high chair. She had Adele's smile, Adele's small hands, a sister Karina had never known existed. Adele stayed behind, Greta continued, to lead Klaus away from Hilda, to make him believe the pregnancy ended in miscarriage. She thought if she could just survive a few more years, until Karina was older, she could expose Klaus and reclaim her life. Jeremy's chest felt crushed. But she didn't survive. No, Greta whispered. 3 months after Hilda was born, Klaus found her. The hit and run was not an accident. It was an execution. Silence fell over the table. Karina had stopped coloring. She was watching Hilda with wide eyes, beginning to understand. Why are you telling me this now? Jeremy asked. Why come here after 3 years? Greta's composure finally cracked. A tear slid down her cheek. Because Klaus is dying. Pancreatic cancer. Terminal. He has perhaps 6 months, and he knows about Hilda. The air left Jeremy's lungs. How? He managed. Someone betrayed us. Someone in my household. 2 weeks ago, men came to my apartment in Munich. They took photographs. They asked questions. I knew what it meant. Klaus wants to finish what he started. He wants to eliminate every Becker heir before he dies, to ensure his children inherit everything. Jeremy felt rage building, hot and sharp. Then why bring Hilda here? Why bring her closer to danger? Greta met his eyes. Because I cannot protect her alone anymore. Because she is your daughter, whether you knew she existed or not. And because Adele made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would bring Hilda to you, tell you the truth, and trust you to do what she could not. She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope, worn and sealed with wax, Adele's handwriting across the front. To Jeremy, if the worst has happened. Jeremy took it with trembling hands. Karina leaned against him, and across the table, Hilda reached for a sippy cup, completely unaware that the adults around her were discussing her survival. But what Jeremy would find in that letter would reveal not just Adele's final words, but a weapon against Klaus Becker that could either save Hilda's life or seal all their fates. Jeremy waited until Karina was asleep that night before opening Adele's letter. Greta and Hilda were staying at a hotel nearby, under false names, taking precautions. He sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in front of him, afraid of what it would say. Finally, he broke the seal. My dearest Jeremy, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Greta has kept her promise. I am so sorry. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for the lies. Sorry that you loved a woman who could never fully be yours. I need you to know that every moment with you was real. Karina was the greatest gift of my life. And Hilda, God, Hilda was the piece of us I could not bear to lose, but had to let go to keep safe. Klaus will not stop. Even in death, he has arranged for our daughter to be found and eliminated. He has hired people, Jeremy, Professional people. They will come. But I have left you something. A weapon. My father kept detailed records of Klaus's crimes. Tax fraud, bribery, 3 murders including Heidi's. Everything is documented in a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Boston. Box 447. The key is sewn into the lining of Karina's baby blanket, the blue one with stars that I always kept in the closet. Use it. Expose him. Protect our girls. I loved you with every honest part of myself. The rest was just survival. Forever yours, Adele. Jeremy read it 3 times. Then he went to Karina's closet, found the baby blanket folded on the top shelf, and carefully opened the lining. The key was there, small and silver, exactly where Adele said it would be. The next morning, he called in sick to work, drove Karina to school, and met Greta at the hotel. He showed her the letter and the key. "We have to move fast," Greta said. "If Klaus knows I am here, he will escalate." They drove to Boston, Hilda sleeping in a car seat they'd bought that morning. The bank was old, marble and brass, the kind of place that dealt in secrets and silence. Jeremy presented the key and Adele's death certificate. The manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, led them to a private room. Box 447 was larger than Jeremy expected. Inside were 3 leather binders, thick with documents, photographs, financial records, emails, everything Adele had promised. But there was something else. A flash drive with a label in Adele's handwriting. The real truth. Greta found a laptop in her bag. They plugged in the drive. What they found was a video file dated 3 days before Adele's death. Jeremy's hands shook as he pressed play. Adele's face filled the screen. She looked exhausted, frightened, but determined. She was sitting in what looked like a storage unit, stark lighting, concrete walls. "If you're watching this," her recorded voice said, "then I'm dead. Klaus succeeded. But I need you to know something he doesn't." She leaned closer to the camera. "I'm not really a Becker. Not by blood." Jeremy felt the world tilt. "My mother, Annalisa, she had an affair before she married Wilhelm. I am the product of that affair. Wilhelm knew. He raised me as his own out of love for her. But legally, genetically, I have no claim to the Becker fortune." Adele's eyes filled with tears. "Which means Karina and Hilda have no claim either. Klaus doesn't know this. He's killing me for an inheritance my children can't even touch. But I couldn't tell him, because if he knew the truth, he'd have no reason to stop. He'd kill me out of rage alone, and then he'd come for you and Karina just to eliminate witnesses." She wiped her face. "So I let him think I'm a threat. I let him think my daughters are threats. And when he kills me, when he thinks he's won, you take these documents to the authorities. You expose every crime. You destroy him. And my girls live free of his shadow." The video ended. Greta sat back, stunned. She played him. She let him murder her to trap him. Jeremy couldn't speak. Adele had sacrificed herself not just to protect them, but to create the conditions for Klaus's downfall. She'd known she couldn't outrun him, so she'd made herself the bait. But there was more. At the bottom of the box was a birth certificate. Adele's original birth certificate, under father's name, unknown, and a DNA test, dated 6 months before Karina was born, confirming Adele shared no genetic material with Wilhelm Becker. Attached was a handwritten note from Wilhelm himself. "Adele, you are my daughter in every way that matters. This proof is your freedom if you ever need it. I'm sorry I could not protect you from Klaus, but I can give you this. Use it wisely." Jeremy looked at Greta. She gave up a fortune she didn't even have rights to. She died for nothing. "No," Greta said firmly. "She died. For them." She gestured to the school photo of Karina clipped inside one of the binders. And for this, she touched Hilda's sleeping head. "She died so they could live without fear. Jeremy gathered the documents. Then let's finish it. They went to the FBI field office that afternoon, presented everything. The agent who took their statement went pale as she flipped through the evidence. Klaus Becker is on our watch list, she said. But we've never had proof. This is enough to bring down his entire operation. How long until he's arrested? Jeremy asked. The agent hesitated. 24 hours, maybe less. But Mr. Walker, if he knows you have this, if he even suspects, then we're already dead, Jeremy finished. The agent made a call. Within an hour, Jeremy, Greta, Karina, and Hilda were in protective custody. That night, Klaus Becker was arrested at his estate in Connecticut. The charges were extensive: murder, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud. The story broke across every news channel. The Becker empire collapsed in a single evening. 3 days later, the agent called Jeremy. He's confessed to everything, including Adele's murder. He said she was always the smart one, the dangerous one. He almost sounded proud when he admitted he'd underestimated her. Jeremy closed his eyes. What happens now? He'll die in prison, the agent said. The cancer will take him before the trial even finishes. But his assets are frozen. His co-conspirators are cooperating. And your daughters are safe. Your daughters. Both of them. But the revelation that would change everything came 3 weeks later, when a lawyer from Wilhelm Becker's estate contacted Jeremy with news that Adele's final gift was not revenge, but something far more valuable. The lawyer's office was modest, nothing like the corporate towers Jeremy had imagined. Margaret Fisk was in her 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who'd spent a lifetime keeping other people's secrets. She gestured for Jeremy and Greta to sit. Hilda was with Karina at a park nearby, under FBI protection that would continue for another 6 months, just to be certain. Mr. Walker, Margaret began, I've been Wilhelm Becker's personal attorney for 30 years. When he learned about Adele's situation, about her need to disappear, he came to me with instructions. She opened a file. Wilhelm knew Adele wasn't his biological daughter. He also knew Klaus would eventually discover the truth. So he created a separate trust, entirely outside the Becker estate, funded with his personal assets. Money that predated his marriage, that was legally his alone to distribute. Jeremy leaned forward. A trust for who? Margaret smiled, and it was genuine, warm. For Adele's children. Karina, and any children Adele might have in the future. He set it up the month after Karina was born. $20 million, held in escrow, to be released only after Klaus was no longer a threat. The number didn't feel real. He also left a letter, Margaret said, sliding an envelope across the desk. For Adele. But since she's gone, I think you should read it. Jeremy opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Adele, you have shown more courage in walking away from wealth than most people show in pursuing it. I am proud to have raised you as my daughter. By the time you read this, Klaus will have shown his true nature. I am sorry I could not stop him. I am sorry I failed to raise him with compassion. But I can give you this: security for your children. Freedom from the weight of the Becker name. You were never a Becker by blood, but you were always a Becker in heart. And that, my dear girl, was the part worth keeping. Live well, love fiercely, and know that I am proud of the woman you became. Forever your father, Wilhelm. Jeremy's vision blurred. Beside him, Greta had tears streaming down her face. The trust is now active, Margaret said gently. The funds are available for Karina's and Hilda's care, education, future. Wilhelm's only stipulation was that they be raised together, as sisters, with knowledge of their mother's sacrifice. Jeremy thought of Adele, who'd given up everything to keep her daughters safe, who died believing they'd inherit nothing but survival. She'd never known her father had left them this. There's one more thing, Margaret said. She pulled out a small jewelry box. Wilhelm wanted each granddaughter to have this when the time came. Inside were 2 necklaces, identical delicate gold chains, with small pendants shaped like birds in flight. He called them freedom birds, Margaret said. He had them made the week Karina was born. He'd hoped to give them in person one day. Jeremy took the box carefully, imagining the old man who'd loved Adele enough to let her go, loved her enough to protect her children, even after death. That evening, at the hotel, Jeremy sat with Karina and Hilda. Greta had agreed to stay in the States, to help raise Hilda alongside Karina. They'd found an apartment together, a makeshift family built from loss and love. Jeremy put the necklaces on his daughters. Karina understood more, her eyes solemn. Hilda just giggled and tried to eat the pendant. "Your mother," Jeremy said, choosing his words carefully, "was the bravest person I've ever known. She gave up a kingdom so you could live as yourselves. She chose you over everything." Karina touched her necklace. "I wish I could tell her thank you." Jeremy pulled both girls close. "You can, by living the life she dreamed for you, by being brave and kind and true, by loving each other the way she loved you." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and bright. But inside that small room, 2 daughters of a woman who'd sacrificed everything discovered they'd inherited something money couldn't buy. They'd inherited proof that love, real love, doesn't abandon. It transforms, it protects, it endures beyond death, beyond secrets, beyond fear. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves behind not just memory, but hope. Adele Walker had walked into darkness so her daughters could live in light. And in the end, that was not tragedy. That was triumph. 5 years later, Karina was 13 and Hilda was 8. They shared a room by choice, despite having a house large enough for separate spaces. Jeremy had used Wilhelm's trust wisely, buying a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, investing in the girls' education and future. Every year, on the anniversary of Adele's death, they visited the cemetery together. But now, Hilda came too. Old enough to understand who the woman was beneath the marble stone. Greta had become a second mother, teaching the girls German, telling them stories of Adele's brief time in Munich, keeping the memory alive. On this particular visit, Karina placed yellow daisies on the grave. Hilda placed a drawing she'd made, a picture of 2 girls holding hands beneath a bright sun. Jeremy stood back, watching his daughters, and felt Adele's presence like sunlight through leaves, gentle and golden. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "They know who you were. They know what you did. And they're going to be extraordinary." The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and for just a moment, Jeremy could swear he heard her voice, soft as memory. "Thank you for finishing what I started. Thank you for loving them enough." The girls ran back to him, laughing about something Hilda had said. Jeremy took their hands, and together they walked toward the car, toward home, toward a future Adele had died to give them. Behind them, carved into marble, her name remained. Adele Elizabeth Walker. But now Jeremy knew the full truth. Not Walker, not Becker, just Adele. Beloved wife and mother, the bravest soul who ever lived. And as they drove away, the late afternoon sun caught the golden birds at his daughters' throats, and they gleamed like promises kept, like love that would never, ever fade. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and share it with someone you want to hear with. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story.